Welcome to April's risk management class, where we are going to continue our discussion of the NAR settlement. We're going to be doing quite a few classes in the next month or so, at least one every other week, and maybe every week in between the classes, maybe a quick little heads up Zoom call or something like that for those who want to get on, something along the lines of what Diane does with her huddles with new agents. By the way, you should check that out. Diane meets with a group of agents and they talk about topics and share ideas and brainstorm a bit, all in an effort to improve your practice of real estate. So great little thing. It's short and quick, to the point. So watch your notifications. I think it's every Monday morning, right, Diane? Yeah, every Monday morning. All right. So let's get right into today's class matter, and I'll share my screen if I can remember how to do it. Yeah. Okay, everyone can see my screen? My puppy?
Yes, we can.
Is that the right one? I hope so. Yeah, okay. All right. As always, you need to reach out to me. There are my numbers. My direct line is probably the best way to reach me during business hours. Rings on my phone, displays messages. I get emailed the messages. So I'm very, very aware when you're reaching out to me. Email me, of course, at remaxconnectionsca.com. And evenings and weekends, if you're working, I like to be available. I'm happy to take your calls. The reason we exist is what you do, So anything I can do to support you and answer questions, sometimes they can't wait until the next day or Monday. I'm happy to take your call. Just text my cell is best. I don't turn my ringer on for personal family reasons. But I keep my phone nearby. It lights up when the text messages come in and I respond right away, usually. Okay, so we're going to talk about preparing to navigate the NAR settlement. This is sort of a preliminary class on how to deal with the impact that the settlement will have on your real estate practice. Last month, we talked about the settlement specifically, went through all the points. It was rather detailed. And one of the themes of today's class and future classes is when you're talking to your clients and prospects, don't get into the weeds too much. They're not real estate agents. There's a lot of detail in the settlement that's very, very important to our practice of real estate, but is not something that buyers and sellers even care to know about or to understand. That we're going to talk about the 2 or 3 major items that impact them. And so when you're discussing the settlement with the public, keep it simple. KISS, keep it simple, sales agents. So it's a little easier to communicate if you don't get into the weeds. I'll get into the weeds a bit because I want you to understand everything so that you can be better prepared. All right. So I want to make 3 important points going forward during this presentation. And that is number 1, even though the changes haven't been approved or finalized yet, they will happen. NAR has said that they are going to adopt the rules that are in the settlement, whether the DOJ approves them or not. It's not likely the DOJ will say, oh, no, you're overreaching. You don't have to do that. Back off a little bit. What they may do is want us to do even more. the DOJ, NAR and real estate brokerages across the country still have problems with lawsuits, and we want to head them off by adopting policies that will prevent future lawsuits. The policies that we had in the past that precipitated these lawsuits are going away, whether or not the official changes are blessed by the trial attorney in Missouri and approved by, well, I guess better to say approved by the trial judge rather in Missouri and blessed by the DOJ. All right. The dialogues I'm going to share with you both today and going forward, I want you to know that they're a first attempt. They will evolve. I've been on the internet, I've been in YouTube, I've been contacting other trainers that I know, going through all my resources to try to pull together dialogues that are, quite frankly, being written as we speak practically on exactly what are the right words to say to give you the best result regarding these changes. So there's going to be an evolution of these dialogues. So one of the things I'm going to do, I'm going to give you some dialogues today. You don't need to write it down. Maybe just listen and feel it, make a point or write down a point or two that you're struck by. I'm going to, of course, I'll put this presentation in Agent Hub. Actually, Lindsay will do it for me. And it'll be in Agent Hub. Additionally, I think we'll start sort of a page in Agent Hub that is nothing more than dialogues, maybe a little booklet that will expand as we continue to present more material to you. By the way, there is a tab now in Agent Hub. Lindsay sent out a notice to everybody that is specifically NAR Settlement resources. And so it's going to be a place where you can go to collect some of this information as you continue in your real estate career. Now, the third point I want to make is major changes in how we do real estate are coming. There's no question about that. And some of these changes are major. This is similar. I mentioned it kind of reminded me of COVID, but what it really reminds me of is when the internet came about and real estate was opened up to the internet. That suddenly our MLSs became public. It happened rather fast, and how we did real estate went through a bit of a change. We were no longer the keepers and the sole source of property information. It was out there for everybody, and so how we approached real estate changed. Our dialogues changed. Some of our techniques changed. Well, this is a similar thing. So changes are coming. That's a fact. All right. Now, the good news is we got 3 months, before these changes become official. That is, frankly, quite a bit of time. Start mastering some of these dialogues, some of these presentations. Start factoring in the things in the settlement that you're going to have to factor into your practice of real estate. So that 3 months, that's quite a bit of time actually in today's society. Now, the bad news is we got 3 months. So we don't put it off too long. Don't be, along comes July and you haven't even begun to put together any kind of a buyer presentation, because you're not going to be able to work with buyers unless you sign them to an agreement. It's as simple as that. And, just as those of you who are listing agents know, you just don't hand a seller a listing contract and say, here, sign this. That's not the way it works. We got some people on this call and we have people in our company who are excellent listing agents, and they know you have to be able to make a presentation, show your value, and convince the seller to hire you rather than somebody else. And you're going to have the same situation with buyers. And 3 months from now, you're not going to have any choice. So keep that in mind. All right, so I want to share some truths, some awarenesses. I think that's a word. If not, I'll make it up. And attitudes that you want to keep in mind as you think about this NAR settlement. All right, the first one is it's natural to fear change. So the fact that you're a little nervous about this, that's perfectly fine. In fact, I talked about it last week. You know, people are stressed, agents are stressed, our loved ones are stressed because they know it impacts their lives because it's impacting your career. And so change is coming, that's a fact. And it's normal to be a little fearful of it. That's fine. Change brings us face to face with the unknown. That's why we fear change. We don't know what's around the bend, and you know, very very small, tiny portion of our society is excited about going around the bend without a clue of what's around there. You know, we've evolved by being real careful about going around bends until we know whether there's a saber-toothed tiger at the other side of that bend or not. And so we've naturally evolved to fear the unknown. So your feelings and all of that, you know, they're pretty normal. It's natural to fear the unknown. When rules change, it's normal to be insecure. Feel threatened. Why? Because now you're going to have to adapt to the new rules, and it makes life a little complicated. When we are threatened, we naturally become defensive. Now, this is the point I want to make. One of the themes through today is we want to abandon being defensive. Stop defending how valuable real estate agents are and just demonstrate your value. When you're defensive, you're not nearly as effective. So it's natural to be defensive, but we want to go from beyond being defensive, you know, be more proactive in what we're doing. When we become defensive, here's the problem. When you get defensive, a primitive part of your brain, the amygdala, takes over. Some of you know about that. That's the center of three rather wired in emotions. Our response is to fight, to fly away, to run away from it, or to freeze. And those of us that have been in sales for a while, we know that those three things are the kiss of death when dealing with, you know, your clients. You can't fight your clients, you can't run from your clients, and you can't freeze in the face of your clients and prospects. So this response is natural, but we want to go beyond it. You know, we have three brains, and the amygdala is in the limbic system, but it's the highest level of the reptilian brain. It is a responsive mechanism in our brain that controls our automatic responses to the fear and to unknown, to changes. And it evolved because that's how we survived as a species. We had to, you know, had to either fight it, run from it, or in some cases, just stay real still and don't move, and it'll go away. But as humans, we developed the neocortex, and that can provide us with a much higher level of response. You know, we can respond to perceived threats by conscious thought. So we can think about how are we going to deal with this and come up with a positive, proactive, results-oriented approach to these changes rather than fight them or run from them or do nothing at all. So a little biology and psychology here thrown in this morning. Hope I didn't bore you with that, but it's sort of my second love. Don't fight these changes. They're going to happen no matter how you feel about it. Don't run from these changes. Embrace them. You can't go back to the old way of doing things. People are still trying to figure out how we can trick, you know, getting, you know, compensation in the MLS. I mean, I'm still hearing that, you know, how can we get around these rules? Never, it's an old adage that managers and brokers share with each other. Never underestimate the creativity of a real estate agent on figuring out ways to break rules. So, don't try to get creative on getting around these things. Embrace them. The good news is everybody else is going to have to embrace them. So, uh, don't freeze in the face of these changes. Be proactive in facing them. Make a conscious choice. See, that's our neocortex kicking in, not our amygdala. Uh, Adopt a positive attitude. Be proactive. Just start doing things now, so that you'll end up, not only surviving these changes, but thriving as a result of them. Be proactive in dealing with the coming changes. Stay current with new developments. Now, rely on reliable sources. CNN and the New York Times have demonstrated that they are the last place in the world that anybody should pay attention to when it comes to talking about how real estate will change. I don't want to lengthen this webinar, or upset you, but I've collected some news articles and some headlines, and it's unbelievable some of the things they are saying. And if you pay attention to it, it's going to upset you. And it's inaccurate. Real estate agents are not going to be replaced by the internet. They weren't before, and they're not going to be now. We do more than open a door. There was a major real estate article in the New York Times that talked about the only value of agents was to open the door and walk around with buyers. My gosh. But again, we don't want to be defensive. We want to be proactive, and we want to not be bummed out by all of these unreliable sources. So stay current with the developments, but avoid paying attention to those among us that don't know what they're talking about. Master the new techniques. Some of them are old and proven. Making presentations to buyers, that's been around for a long time. Some of the words are going to change, but some of the dialogue and some of the techniques that you use are the same techniques that we've used for a long, long time. For sale by owner dialogues and techniques, they're going to be adapted rather, to dealing with sellers who don't want to offer buyer compensation. It's the same sort of problem. So some of the techniques are going to rely on old and time-tested, proven techniques that will work. The more things change, sometimes the more things stay the same. We've got to go back to being salespeople, not clerks or order takers. And I think I'm preaching to the choir. RE/MAX Connections agents, you are salespeople without a doubt. As I was talking to Ingrid earlier, we're an elite group of agents, quite frankly. We got some phenomenally powerful, skillful, service-oriented agents who are salespeople and not clerks. Sometimes some of us get a little lazy sometimes and approach our career as if we are a clerk, if we are, taking an order. The buyer wants to do something or the seller wants to do something, and instead of helping the seller maybe avoid making a mistake, we sort of just, okay, and we don't really perform a sales service. Now, sales, that's a capital S sales. I have a definition of sales, selling, but it's a capital S selling. And that is helping people make decisions they might not make without you. And they thank you for it later. So, sometimes people will make a wrong decision or not make the right decision, and a capital S salesperson will help them understand a better course of action. And they trust you, you make sense, you presented it well, and so they follow your advice. And a week later, a month later, sometimes it's a day later, they thank you. Wow, thank you so much. And that's one of the joys of selling real estate, I think, is taking that housewarming gift over to the buyer when they close on their home and move in because they are so thrilled now that they have their home, and they're so in love with everything. And you sometimes think about, oh yeah, but I remember through the transaction how difficult you know, it's not dialogue, this is just, you know, memory, how difficult you sometimes were and how many times you wanted to do something that would have screwed this all up. But thankfully, you know, we got you to the finish line, and here you are in your dream home. And it's the same with sellers. You know, love to you know, close of escrow, visit the seller, and deliver them a little closing gift on the sale of their home from a seller's perspective. And again, you know, watch them, you know, be so happy that the outcome finally got there. So selling, helping people make decisions. We got to help our buyers and our sellers make decisions now, because they're going to react to what they see in the news, and they're going to say things like, oh, I don't have to pay a buyer's agent anymore. Well, you don't have to. You never had to, by the way. But that might not be the best decision to get you what you want, Mr. Seller or Mrs. Seller. Okay. I don't know what happened here. Oh, okay. Something. Okay. All right. Okay. Don't worry about what you can't control. Don't worry about what the new rules will be. Don't worry about them. You stay informed. You know, we're going to help you do that. We're going to keep you well informed on what you need to do, what rules you have to follow. But you know, don't worry about it, and don't participate in group misery. Don't be commiserating about, oh, woe is me, and real estate is horrible now, and you know, just you know, that's not going to serve you well at all. Now, I want to review last week or last month, rather. I went through the settlement in detail, but like I said at the beginning, don't get bogged down in the weeds. Just, you know, especially in conversations with your clients, your prospects, your sphere of influence, you just want to be focused on the major points that have the biggest impact on the clients, on your clients. And so I want to summarize the major rule changes for you, because this is what you want to focus on when you are explaining you know, the NAR settlement to your sphere. So effective July 15th, prepare in advance. I mean, that's just words to you. You know, this is something you want to get ready, because this is going to happen. You know, number one, the MLSs will be prohibited from requiring offers of compensation to buyer's agents be made by listing agents, or displaying offers of compensation in any field, whether it be the CBB or in remark sections, or displaying listing agents commission. In a nutshell, there shall be no mention of commission in the MLS. Legal people that I respect, because I've been asked this question, and I wanted to see, you know, I have an answer, but I wanted to see if I was being too conservative. Across the board, agents, legal people right now. Now maybe when the settlement is approved and the DOJ weighs in, maybe they will lighten up a little bit. But right now, when these changes kick in, the belief is the word commission has got to disappear from the MLS. So, you know, putting in remarks, call the office for buyer's agent's commission. You know, check our website for buyer's agent commission. That's probably not going to be allowed in the MLS. So in a nutshell, offers of compensation are going to be removed from the MLS. It does not mean, you know, not NAR members doesn't mean the commissions can't be paid. NAR members cannot facilitate or support any non-MLS mechanism or third-party internet aggregators to offer compensation. So there's already been a website that came up that now displays commissions. There's some question about whether or not that how will NAR establish an arm's length from such a website? So that'll be worked out. Brokerages can, on their own listings, make offers of compensation directly to by the listing broker to buyer's agents or on the website. So what's that mean in simple English? We can still offer compensation. Mr. Seller, you can still offer compensation, and I can still promote it. I just can't use the MLS to do that. It's as simple as that. Number two, agents acting for sellers must disclose to the seller and get the seller's approval to make any offer of compensation or to pay compensation to a buyer's agent. Now, that has kind of been the case in California because it was part of the listing contract. When that was first put on the listing contract, probably half the RLAs we saw where the buyer broker compensation, that paragraph about halfway down the page, was blank. And it was a bit of a challenge to get agents to understand, no, you need to do that. You know, we need to inform our sellers what we are doing as far as compensating other agents to bring buyers. That is now mandatory. And it's going to be even more mandatory going forward. But CAR has been ahead of the curve because they created the opportunity for you to disclose and get permission to offer compensation to a buyer's agent. So that's going to continue, and you're going to need the seller's permission to compensate the buyer's agent. And the disclosure must be in writing, and the approval must precede any agreement to pay the actual commission. Sellers can agree in advance in a listing contract to offer compensation. So you can still put in the listing contract that the seller will pay a buyer's agent. You can also put in a listing contract. It's being tweaked now. Hopefully it'll be out. Well, it will be out before, by June. And it'll have how to handle paying a buyer's agent directly or offering a concession to the buyer, and then the buyer can pay their agent. And number three, this is the other biggie. I think the first biggie is no more commission in the MLS. The other biggie is prior to working with a buyer, including showing a home to a buyer, an agent must have the buyer sign a buyer representation agreement, including any compensation that the buyer's agent will receive. So we're all going to be required. Those of you who are still working with buyers, you're going to be required to have a buyer broker agreement in place. Now, presumably, the listing agent holding open houses, they are working for the seller and not the buyer. So at first, when this rule first came out, there was a lot of, oh my gosh, how am I going to do an open house? You mean I got to have everybody that comes in sign a BRBC? How's that going to work? Well, people have thought about it a little bit more, and they've come to a logical conclusion, and that is technically you're really not working for the buyer at an open house. You never even met the buyer. You don't even know if you're going to work for the buyer. And you don't stop them at the door and say, hey, before you come in, let me determine whether or not you and I should work together. You just say, on behalf of the seller, come on in. And so it's probable that at an open house, listing agents will not be required to have every buyer who walks in sign some sort of representation agreement, because at that point, you're not working with the buyer. Now, if you're going to take the buyer to look at another house when you close this open house, I actually had an agent one time used to close his open houses on the spot. And I had to tell him that's probably not a good practice. But when he had a hot buyer, he just closed his open house and start taking them around. Well, if you are going to work with a buyer, who's coming through your open house, maybe, hey, I'll be done here at 4:00. Why don't I take you over to Happy Hollow Way at 5:30? Well, then you're going to have a buyer representation agreement. I want to talk a little bit about that today and in a lot of detail in a future class. All right, let's talk about some dialogue tips and suggestions. And again, these are going to evolve a bit. So, but you want to start thinking about, how do you explain the this NAR settlement and how it impacts buyers and sellers. Well, the first thing, like I said earlier, avoid over-explaining. Don't get into the weeds. Keep it simple, sales agent. So, and address the issues or questions that were raised. I know sometimes I get in the weeds a bit. People ask me a question, and I think of 3 other questions they should be asking, and I start answering all their questions. And sometimes that's good, but often it confuses the heck out of them and just lengthens the conversation, much to their chagrin. So, so this is a good tip for all of us to keep in mind. Address what's being raised and not everything else. Don't get lost in the details. You must be able to explain the new rules. And again, that 3 on this in this presentation, and it will be posted in Agent Hub. That's as much as you need to explain those 3 rules. That's why I put them together and summarized them a bit, just to set them aside. Here's what you should be explaining. How paying commissions will work. That's obviously going to be something you're going to want to be able to explain. And then for sellers, the value of offering buyer agent compensation or seller concessions as a marketing tool. That sellers, we've already had agents talk to me already, and we've already had one seller who's just assumed there is no value in paying the buyer's agent. I don't have to, and actually called the agent and changed the listing agreement to remove the buyer agent compensation because he didn't understand the value. And you don't win nobody bats 1,000. The agent who was confronted with that, I think, did a pretty good job of trying to help the buyer understand. The seller, help the seller understand the value of offering compensation. But this seller just, misinformed and just couldn't be swayed. That's why you're going to want to practice and work on this. I'm going to give you some insight on how to do that, even in today's class and in future classes as well. For buyers, the value of working with their own agent versus the listing agent. I think dual agency is going to skyrocket under this agreement, under this settlement environment. And for those of you that are listing agents, all right, and you're okay with dual agency, all right. For those of you that are mostly buyer's agents, you're going to have the challenge of convincing buyers that it might not be in their best interest to work with the listing agent just to save the commission. For listing agents who have an opportunity and are willing to do so, how dual agency could benefit the client. So if you are inclined to be more than happy with unattached buyers calling you and having you write the offer because you're the listing agent, you're going to want to explore that a little bit at the listing appointment more than you probably did in the past. And why? Because it's going to happen more often. And there's some considerations about that you should have in mind. And we'll go into that in some detail when we do the tweaks to your listing presentation class. All right. Now, after your prospect or client brings up a NAR settlement or something related to it, start by asking this question. Here is, if there's one tip you walk away from, if there's one thing you write down, here's the first thing anyway. I mean, everything else was just a little background, help you with your attitude and your thought process. But this is powerful dialogue. Are you ready? It's real simple, by the way. What have you heard? What have you read? Hey, I heard there won't be any commissions anymore. We don't have to pay you commissions anymore. Oh, no. That's blah, 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 blah. And we just, go into overdrive, starting to explain, and we don't even know what their perspective is. Before you diagnose, before you prescribe, you got to diagnose. Before you handle an objection, you got to know what's their thought process. Before you get into a NAR settlement type discussion, what's happening with commissions, what's happening with MLS, I wouldn't answer that question without leading to this. Well, that's a great question. What have you heard? Because that will give you some perspective. For those who quote other agents, hey, I was talking to another agent. He said I don't have to blah, 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 blah. What exactly did they tell you? Boy, if you screenshotted anything, and by the way, this will be in Agent Hub, but if you screenshotted anything, this would be a slide, because that is those. I think those two are very important point. That's how you start almost any conversation with your prospects and clients about the NAR settlement. When you're asked a question, and I'm sure this has been really confusing. This is your dialogue to them. I'm sure this has been really confusing. You're probably hearing all kinds of things in the media. I'm curious, what have you heard? See how it works? When your prospect brings up another agent, I'm sure this has been really confusing. Not only are you hearing all kinds of things in the media, I'm sure the other agents you've been talking to are telling you different things. What have other agents been telling you? That's how I would start every conversation. Don't defend, explain. Don't defend, hey, we've always provided a service and blah, 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 and we're entitled and I'm not working for free. Get out of the defend mode. Get out of the amygdala. Get into the neocortex. Put your thinking cap on and start explaining, what's going to happen, why things should be the way you think they should be. Move from defending to explaining. For the listing side, explain the advantages of offering buyer agent compensation. For the buyer side, explain the advantages of signing a buyer representation agreement. See, explaining, not defending. When you're asked by a seller, and I put sellers in quote because you're going to be asked this question by people that are not your seller, but you got to kind of think, are they asking from the perspective of a seller or from the perspective of a buyer? And so kind of think about that a little bit. The tweaks of the dialogue aren't that great, but the dialogue, your approach changes slightly depending on who you're talking to. If you're talking to a renter and they're not your client yet, you're not showing them property, they're not going to do anything till next year. Well, you don't need to talk to them about, a seller's perspective on this, only to the extent that how it impacts them when they are the buyer. But you would talk to them about a buyer's perspective. Just like I would argue most homeowners that talk to you about this, they don't usually buy a home until they sell the one they got. That's pretty normal. And so, or pretty usual. So they're probably talking to you from the perspective of a seller. So think about that. I don't mean that they are a seller or they are a buyer. I'm putting that in quotes because what's their perspective? And so they might say, are sellers still going to be offering to pay the buyer's agent's commission? Or why should I still pay the buyer's agent commission or offer a seller concession? See, that's the kind of dialogue you might have. Well, may I share why that's the case? Pretend you're a buyer and there are 10 homes on the market that could work for you. I think I inadvertently deleted a slide. There's a lead-in slide, but I won't worry about finding it. You'll see it in the notes. You'll see it in the dialogue booklet that I'll put together. But basically, before you get into may I say, share why that's the case, there's dialogue that successful sellers will still be offering buyer agent compensation or seller concessions to the buyer. So that slide, for some reason, disappeared from my presentation. And then you say, may I share with you why that's the case? So in other words, the lead in, after they say, are they still going to be paying, agent commissions? Are they still going to be making concessions? Why do we need to make concessions? Well, successful sellers will still see the value in doing that. I mean, I've got a little better words, a little more fleshed out than that, but that concept is what you say first. Well, successful sellers, yeah, they will probably still be doing that. And may I share with you why that's the case? Pretend you're the buyer. There's a power in the word pretend, by the way. I don't want to do a little webinar within a webinar, but the word pretend is powerful. You can get people to consider things they wouldn't normally consider if you say pretend. You're talking to a FISBO and you're asking them what happens if you don't sell the home. Are you going to abandon buying that home on the coast that you would like? And if you say it that way, they're going to say, oh, don't worry about it. I can sell a home. Everybody can sell a home. They're not going to, they're challenged by it. So you say pretend. Pretend you don't sell a home. You could, you may well, you could sell this home, but pretend you don't. Would you give up the home on the coast, or would you maybe consider having an agent help you? See, so that's the pretend. So pretend you're the buyer. That's that you want to lead with that. And there are 10 homes on the market that could work for you. You're the buyer. There are 10 homes. Any one of them might work for you. You need to see them to know. 8 of them are offering to pay the buyer's agent or offering to sell a concession so that you would not have to come out of pocket to pay your agent. See, you pretend you're the buyer, and that's what you're thinking. Oh, great, they're paying my agent's commission. I don't have to come out of pocket. And there are 2 that are not, which means to buy one of those, you as the buyer would have to come up with the extra funds to pay your agent. 8 offer help to pay your agent, and 2 do not. If you were the buyer, so you gotta keep them thinking about the buyer. See, here's the tweak on this, by the way, or not, no tweak on this. Here's what this tweaks. A lot of agents talk about, well, agents aren't going to show your home unless you offer them. The sellers don't care about agents, but they do care more about buyers. They can relate to buyers. They can't relate to us. They think we live on another planet, So this dialogue, if you'll notice, one of the subtle things about this dialogue is I'm not talking about what agents are going to do. I'm talking about what buyers are going to do. And what does the seller care about? I really care about my agent or my buyer's agent. No, they care about their buyer. They want one. They care that the buyer will make an offer. So that's the subtle part about this dialogue. So 8 offer to help pay your agent, and 2 do not. If you were the buyer, which ones would you want to see first? Which ones would you rather make an offer on? Make it about the buyer, not the agent. After they answer one of the 8, here's another powerful thing to master. Why is that? A little seminar within a seminar. You want to avoid asking people why most of the time. Why? Because why creates defense. I don't want to pay a commission. Why not? They're going to defend it. I don't want to buy that house. Why not? I don't want to approve this repair request. Why not? That may not be your exact words, but when you lead with why, you create defensiveness and you create the need on the other side to defend what they're doing. Why'd you wear that blouse? Why'd you wear, why did you, buy that suit, Walt? Not even if they don't say it that way. Why'd you buy that suit? I'm going to defend it. But when it's good to ask why? When defending it works in your advantage. Let me give you an obvious one. I share this all the time. I'm at a listing presentation. Folks, before we get started, I'd like to ask you a question. Goodness knows there's more than one agent, more than me, who works in this marketplace. There are many other very good agents you could have called. I mean, we got 19,000 of them in San Diego County. Just curious, why did you call me? Think about that. They're now going to defend you being in their living room. Well, because you have a lot of signs. You have marks. You have posts. You see, they're defending their decision to call you. They're selling you to you. So sometimes asking why is beautiful. Asking why here is beautiful when they say, you've asked them, which ones would you make an offer on? The ones that are helping the agent pay the agent, or the ones that are not? And they say, well, one of the 8. That's going to be their usual answer. Get them to defend that. Why? Because it makes a point. Why is that? Here's an important point to this whole thing. People do not argue with their own facts. They will argue with yours. You know, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, you better make an offer pretty quick. You know, interest rates are going up. You're a salesman, and they think you're a small S salesman. Small S salesmen are people who talk people into doing stuff, and then the person that did it is sorry later. That's small S. It's the opposite of Walt's definition, capital S. You know, I help people make decisions they're glad they made. They might not have made them without me. See? So back to that buyer. I'm never going to say, you know, you should be getting off the fence and buying now because interest rates are going up. That's my facts. Don't tell. Skillfully ask questions to get the prospect, the client, to tell you with their answers what you want to tell them. Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, you know, I don't know if you read the news or not, but interest rates are doing what? They're going up. Yeah, they are. And if they go up, what does that do to your house payment? It makes it more. In my mind, I literally say this. Don't lose that fact. Keep that in mind. See, that is their facts. See, that's how you get people to tell you what you want to tell them. See? So keep, you know, this is a powerful technique, you know, in any dialogue. Some sellers will say, well, I'd look at the houses I like most rather than ones that are offering compensation. You know, 1 out of 5 sellers are going to be a little more on the ornery side and make that statement. Okay. So you ask, would you make a full price offer or maybe a little lower offer to compensate for the fact you would have to pay your own agent? Would you try to negotiate some sort of concession to help you pay the offer? Would you at least try to do that? What's better, negotiating one offer or offering a concession up front and maybe negotiating multiple offers? All right. You must be prepared to answer questions from the prospects and the clients about the NAR settlement. Acknowledge that changes are coming. Find out what they've heard or what they think they've heard. There's a lot of information out there. What have you been hearing? Listen to their response. Herd commissions are going to be going down. For now, we don't know what's really going to happen because it isn't final yet. So you can say that about anything they've heard because we don't know that. When talking to sellers, got that in the wrong order. When talking to sellers, for now, we don't know what's really going to happen because it isn't final yet. The settlement hasn't been approved yet. And when it is finalized, probably in July, we'll know more about its impact. For now, there are only 2 things we know. First, and again, this will be available to you probably tomorrow. I don't know if I'll get it all done today, but we'll get it to you. First, we will no longer be able to publish the commission you're going to be offering in the MLS. So you're talking to a seller. Even if they haven't listed with you yet, assumptive close, neuro-linguistic programming, that's part of this dialogue, part of a lot of my dialogue. And by the way, I've tweaked dialogues off the internet. I've ripped off people. Creativity is hiding the source. I've been ripping off dialogues from everybody in the world for 20 years. So that sales definition probably came from somebody else, but I can't for the life of me figure out who. I've been saying it so long, I think it's my definition. So, but I want to give credit where credit's due. A lot of this is a collection from many, many other sources, and then me tweaking a little bit with what I know about dialogues. So first, we'll no longer be able to publish commission you're offering the MLS. It's pretty simple. It's as simple as that. We'll still need to offer and promote buyer agent compensation to motivate agents to bring their buyers and to motivate buyers who don't want to or perhaps can't come out of pocket to pay their agent to write offers. We want to motivate these buyers to write offers. In that way, we maximize exposure and create more interest in your property to get the best price and put more money in your pocket. The other thing we know is if this goes through, buyers, before they can come through your door, are going to have to sign a buyer representation agreement. The same way you're going to sign a listing agreement with me. Maybe right now, or maybe just, someday, whatever. Okay. That says they are represented by an agent when they go through your house, and will probably require the buyer to compensate their agent. Most buyers will look for sellers who will help them with that expense. So even, see, 8 out of 10, which one do you think buyers will be interested in? Well, one of the 8. Yeah, why is that? 8 out of 10. Which one do you think buyers will be more interested in? They're going to want the ones, doesn't matter what the compensation is not. See, either way, that you've got dialogue to handle either answer. Now back to the commissions are going down, believe, but this time from a buyer perspective. Heard commissions are going to be going down when talking to buyers. Right now, we don't know what's really going to happen because it isn't final yet. Look familiar? The settlement hasn't been approved yet, and when it's finalized, probably in July, we'll know more about its impact. For now, there are really only 2 things we need to know, or we know rather. First, we will no longer be able to publish commission that sellers may be willing to offer in the MLS. Even so, in order to attract qualified and motivated buyers to their property, many sellers will still be willing to compensate the buyer's agent or offer a seller concession that you can use to pay your agent. First, we will no longer be able to, same slide. Yeah, first, we'll no longer be able to publish commission you're going to pay anyway. We still need to offer and promote it to tax. I'm sorry, duplicate slide. The other thing we know is if this goes through in July, buyers, before they can be shown a property by an agent, are going to have to sign a buyer representation agreement. And that agreement will say that they are represented by an agent and what that buyer's obligation is to compensate their agent. For now, for most homes, the seller is compensating the buyer's agent, and there is no requirement that the buyer sign a buyer representation agreement before being shown a house. See, now what that does is create a little urgency. If you have buyers sitting on the fence, I'm gonna type this up and add it to the dialogue booklet that we're gonna put in the agent hub. But basically, let the buyers know right now, commission structure will change, and buyers' obligations to compensate their own agent will change. But for now, sellers are expecting to pay the buyer's agent. Nothing's changed now. It probably won't change until mid-July. See, this is for a buyer sitting on the fence. They're ready to buy, but they're sitting around waiting. In the future, sellers may not be willing to cover the cost for the buyer's agent, and the buyer will have to come out of pocket to compensate their agent. So it can create a little urgency with the buyers you've got now, with the dialogue that for now, your services are being covered by the seller. You don't have to pay out of pocket for my services. It's built into the price of the home. Don't say I'm free. Avoid that word. But they are being covered by the seller. That's a perfectly fine words, and you don't have to come out of pocket. That's perfectly fine too. All right, you need to practice these dialogues and others. You got to know them cold, folks. So you don't want to be thinking, what do I say next? When you know what to say, your mind can focus on listening to your client. That's the key, because you will be far more effective as a communicator if you are hearing what the client's saying rather than thinking you know what they're saying, but you're busy thinking about how you're going to respond. What should I say? What should I say? That you want to avoid that. How do you avoid that? By practicing the dialogue. They're wired in. All right, some recommendations. Master dialogues to explain the new rules, how compensation will work, and the best course of action for the client. And we're going to help you with that. Well, you're going to be mastering it because you're going to practice, but we'll provide you with a whole bunch of dialogues. You can pick and choose which ones you like. Learn how to present a buyer representation agreement, the agreement itself. Now, here's a model that I'm developing in my own mind. Others have talked about it, and I'm thinking this is probably a very good model. And that model is show first, consult second. You got a buyer who wants to see a house, and you say to the buyer, okay, now before I can show you the house, I got to have you sign an agreement, and let me take you through the agreement, and I want to sign you up for 3 months, and here's what I'm going to do, and blah, 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 blah. And you end up doing a buyer consultation, and all they want to do is see a house. I think that's going to be a challenge. So you show the property first, but you do have them sign an agreement. I mentioned it in the last class, and I'll give you more detail. The agreement will be for 1 day. The agreement will be for 1 house. It's real simple. You can explain it real simply because there's not a lot to be concerned about if it's only going to be for 1 day, because you're not going to be working with them. If it's only going to be for 1 house, what's the odds that the buyer's going to buy the house you're showing them? So the odds are that this will not be the one they buy. It's just odds, right? Every time I show a house to one buyer, he buys that house. I don't think so. So show first, and of course you will get a buyer broker agreement signed, but the presentation is going to be so much simpler. Then after you show them the house, you talk to them a little bit, and they like you, you like them, you do a little bit of pre-qualifying while you're taking them through the house. And I don't mean financially, I mean them as a qualified and motivated buyer, qualified more than just financial. You can then say, I'd love to continue to work for you, show you more houses. If we do, we need to extend this agreement. Let me take you, let me cover a few more details. So I'm going to develop this for you. It's developed in my mind. I've got notes written out about it. I'm going to present this to you in a future class. Lead with the showing, and it's a non-exclusive agreement. Follow with buyer consultation. And there you could present an exclusive agreement if you wanted. Craft a unique value proposition. That's going to be very important. If you haven't done that before, you're going to want to do it now, especially for buyers and for sellers. Develop and master a buyer consultation presentation, which would be more than a quick, here, sign the BRBC so I can show you a house. That'll be a little better than that. But basically, that's the show first model. Just get them to sign the BRBC, be sure they understand what they're signing, but don't be doing a dog and pony show about all the wonderful things you're going to be doing for them. They just want to see the house today. Do that at your second appointment. Revise your listing presentation. Those of you who have listing presentations, by the way, I was shocked to learn 37% of agents do not have listing presentations. So that explains why they are not listing agents, apparently, or they're not very successful at listing, because the majority of agents are not listing agents. 37% don't even have a listing presentation. Now, what's not shocking is 83% of agents have no buyer presentation. That's going to change. You're going to have a buyer presentation. I dare say there's not a listing agent in this company that doesn't have a listing presentation. So think about that going forward, because you're going to be signing up buyers just like listing agents have been signing up sellers. So anyway, revise your listing presentation. Those of you that have one, and if you don't, create one, of course. You got to explain the new MLS rules. You got to handle the buyer, broker, commission, and seller, ER beyond that typo, seller concessions. And then more than in the past, you're going to want to start exploring dual agency. You're going to have to make a decision on how you want to handle it, whether you want to refer it to another agent, preferably somebody in the company. It would still be dual agency, but you wouldn't use the word, I would be your exclusive agent. No, you wouldn't. Not if it's dual agency with anybody else in the company. But you could use the word, I'll be working exclusively with you. So the word working, and I don't do dual agency. So if I get a buyer, I'm going to refer them because I only want to represent you. Well, if you refer them to any other person in our company, you're also representing the buyer. You're just not working with the buyer. See, so use that work. So you're gonna have a little dialogue here. By the way, just to give you a preview, gonna help you develop maybe a fee structure. So, if I am a dual agent, because here's what's going to happen, they're going to expect you, if you don't address it, they've agreed to give you 3% or 2.5%. And now the buyer wants to work with you, and suddenly they're expecting you to do the buyer and the seller for 2.5%. I don't think so. But that might be with the pickle you're in if you don't address it up front. So dual agency is going to be a bigger part of your presentation than it was in the past. So you're going to want to make those revisions. Folks, I think that's it. Now, questions. Do we have questions?
We do. We have a few. So, well, Matt Eller is wondering if you'll be diving deeper into the 3 tips that were toward the beginning of your presentation, because he thinks that would be very beneficial.
The 3 tips?
Yeah, I don't know which ones.
Does he mean the 3 points? I don't think he means the 3 points. Is Steve on the call?
Yeah, he's on the call. Matt, do you want to unmute? And there he is.
Yeah, I guess there was actually more than 3. I was just, at the first slide. I honestly, there was so much information I don't recall. It just feels like there needs to be some deeper dive on some of these discussions or bullet points. That's all.
Well, great question, great point, and you're 100% right. The purpose of this class today was to get out front of dialogues you're having, to give you a bit of a handle. The purpose of this class wasn't to teach you how to make a presentation to a buyer, how to tweak your seller presentation, how to go into objection handling with a buyer who doesn't want to sign a buyer representation agreement, or a seller who doesn't want to offer broker compensation, buyer agent compensation, or seller concessions. I just wanted to give you a little bit of, like it was promoted, some talking points, get your brain flowing. But the short answer to your question, absolutely. The next 5 or 6 classes, I think the phrase is putting meat on the bone. We're going to put a lot of meat on the bone. We're going to give you lots of more dialogue, lots of more things to present, lots of more benefits that you can, develop a value proposition statement with. So hope that answers your question, Matt. Yeah, more is coming. But I wanted to give you some quick dialogue, get you thinking about how do you answer somebody who says, I heard you don't have to pay commissions. Oh, well, you heard wrong. I mean, that's not going to be an answer. Well, that's crazy. What, do they expect me to work for free? That's wrong. So having the dialogue I shared with you today is just a nice way to respond to some of the inquiries you're going to get.
Kim Tortolot is wondering how you'd handle this objection at a listing presentation. If the seller said, if we offer to pay the listing agent and offer a concession for the buyer's agent, and if we go find a house where there's no concession for our buyer's agent, it feels like we're paying triple.
Well, now, by the way, I'm going to give you a little technique within this answer. You should lead off most objection handlings with an agreement. See, you've got to give them acknowledgement that they're not crazy. I have a little mantra that I use, and it's kind of dangerous to say it here now because I have to really explain it in detail, but I've done lots of objection handling classes, and I lead in with, nobody does stupid things for stupid reasons. They always think they have good reason. They don't, I'm going to be stupid and just do this. They have a good reason, but what they're doing is stupid. Now, of course, that's not dialogue, that's an attitude. So, what you're about to do does not make sense, but you have good reasons for why you want to do it. Again, that's not dialogue, that's attitude. So let me explore your reasons so I can make sure that what you should be doing addresses your reasons. Okay, so to acknowledge the fact that it's not a stupid objection, I would agree with them. Oh yeah, if you end up paying the buyer agent through a seller concession, you pay me, and then you buy a house with a seller refusing to pay, you would pay triple. See, now when you do that, it lowers their defenses. See, they're ready for this. Oh no, it doesn't work that way. See, you don't do that. You agree with them because they're not making a stupid statement. That's exactly correct. However, see, now you can continue. However, there are ways, procedures we can follow to help avoid that possibility. And I think, I mean, I don't want to get in the weeds too much, but I think the likelihood, what you're going to be working on more is helping them understand that, just like, you know, I would probably explore it this way. Let me ask you, why are you willing to pay a buyer concession? To pay a seller concession, rather, to the buyer's agent. So your concern is you're going to pay that, right? Well, you don't have to. See, it disarms them when you don't fight with them. When you agree with them, they listen to you. Now they think you're a consultant, not a small S salesman. Capital S, help you make a decision you might not make if you don't listen to me, and you'll be glad you made that decision when this is all over with. That's why that definition is so important to me. So, you know, why are you willing to do that? What's the benefit to you? And then I'm going to turn that into, does it make sense that the home you're buying, the seller will want the same benefit? See, I'm gonna address probably helping your client understand the likelihood of him having to pay triple, although it does exist, is reduced by the fact that he's probably going to get 8 out of 10 sellers right now have said they would pay a buyer agent commission if it made sense. Does that help a little bit? And we're going to have more classes on that. I'm a regular objection handling class.
So
Did that help, Kim?
Yeah, it seems like it's more of like how you phrase it, and kind of more of a psychological, like asking questions and putting themselves in other shoes.
Exactly. Removing the tension by letting them know that's a legitimate concern. Is it possible? Of course it is. Is it probable? I don't have a crystal ball, but I don't think so. My kind of dialogue.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Vicky Varnell says, in this market with low inventory, many buyers care about the home or neighborhood and oftentimes waiting for inventory there. So the agent commission is not going to be something they care about if they want the home. What if they say they'll go to the listing agent to avoid paying a compensation to us as the buyer's agent?
All right. Now, there's a lot of different ways to approach this. Let me just give you a couple of real quick ones. If you got into a dispute with somebody, let's say somebody ran a red light and smashed into your car. And not only did they destroy your car, they sent you to the hospital. But they don't want to pay you. So, and they're concerned you're going to go after them, so they get an attorney. Are you going to hire their attorney to represent you? Or you get an attorney. Do you think they're going to hire your attorney to represent them? That's a real fractured dialogue. I'm going to develop that more, but that's an attitude. That's a concept. You know, I actually had somebody one time share with me, if you know they're divorced and you know that it was a contentious divorce, let me ask you a question. You know, when you got divorced, why didn't you hire your wife's attorney, your former wife's attorney? You guys could have saved money. Okay, so it's that so the concept is, you know, there's lots of other ways to do that. You know, you want me to represent your best interest, right? If you were to hire me, yeah, you'd like to pay as little as possible. That's going to be hard in this market, but maybe we get a few more concessions. You'd like that, right? Yeah. All right. You'd also like, if there's repairs to be made, that I negotiate some pretty good repairs, right? That's right. And maybe possession. You have some issues about when you so you're going to go through all that, right? See, my job is to represent your best interest. How are you going to get that addressed by a seller's agent who's also been hired to get the seller the most money, to pay as little for repairs as possible, and to not give you any concessions on possession? Can you see how that might be kind of hard for you to negotiate? By the way, who do you think that agent has a closer relationship with? The seller they've been working with? Probably no. Or you just showed up. See, that's the kind of approach I would take. Again, this class isn't to give you all that. That's if you were on the office call yesterday, or you got an agent hub notice that I sent out, then you know that we got classes coming up. By the way, let me do a little aside. I say that I sent out and I'm going to let you know on a little secret. Half of what I do, I got two fantastic people in the background who make me look good. Lindsay does all the typing for this, help me organize these situations. Half of the agent hub memos I send out, I ask Emily to help me draft them because she's excellent at it. And, you know, frankly, I've got a lot of things going on and we need to get these. So, you know, I wanted to acknowledge when I say I'm sending out an agent hub, you know, Walt has a support team that is by bar none the best in the world. And so, but anyway, I sent out or I asked Emily to help me send out an agent hub notice where we listed those classes. And so we'll be covering those classes for you. Those subjects.
right. Thanks, Walt. Okay, we have some more questions. The next one was from Jamie Mellum,
Uh-huh.
and she said, any insight on how appraisers will take these changes into consideration? I'm wondering if appraisers will calculate comps differently in cases where those recent sales did pay a buyer's agent when used as a comp to a subject property. This may be something a seller should know about at the time we take a listing.
Yeah, that's a great question, Jamie. And that's it. Those are getting to be somewhat, well, they're technical issues that need to be resolved. And from a previous class, you know, I talked to you a little bit about not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. NAR has disappointed all of us to one degree or another for various things they've done, not the least of which is get us into this pickle. But on the other hand, they are powerful as a lobby group. And so NAR is working with not only HUD, of course, the VA administration, but Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac on some guidelines on how all this is going to happen. There's already been some revision of maximum concessions allowed. And so I can't give you a good answer on the appraisals. I don't think it'll have an immediate impact right now for the next 3 months, because in fact, most sellers are in fact paying commissions and it's been built into the sales price and the valuation that appraisers give properties for, you know, 50 plus years. It's not changing today. Will it be tweaked a little bit in the future? I can't imagine it won't be. But interestingly enough, it might be tweaked in the direction that appraisers are going to have to allow for the loan to be approved and the value to be there. That includes the buyer paying for the buyer's agent and building that into the financing, not paying out of pocket. So how will that impact appraisers? Those are great questions. I don't know that I can give you any kind of an answer now.
Well,
it's being looked at.
Can I just give a little information? Sure. I was on a CRMLS webinar last week, and that was one of the things that they addressed. And what they were indicating is that as listing agents, there's going to be added fields that will have to input what were concessions that were made to the buyers. And they're only concerned about things that the seller's paying for. So if the buyer ended up paying their own concessions, AKA commission, the MLS isn't going to care about that. They're only going to track the expenses that the seller is covering, and they're going to add fields into the MLS, whereas listing agents, we're going to have to report that. So when we comp out properties, it's going to literally be delving into each individual property to see what were the seller concessions on property A versus property B versus property C. So it's going to get a lot more complex.
Yeah, well, I don't know about CRMLS. I'm frankly not extremely familiar with it. But the San Diego MLS is about the 4th or 5th generation. And I know several staff members, including supervisors, both past and present. And I will say concessions has always been a field in the San Diego MLS. There's always been the ability to list concessions that seller pay. The question is going to be, and that's where the Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac people, it's not going to be so much an MLS consideration. So they have a field, yeah, of course, they're going to have a field and they'll put that in there. But will Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac punish sellers because there is a concession that the seller paid the buyer's agent for the buyer? Now think about this, when they've done it for decades. So suddenly the buyer's not going to pay it, but the seller's not going to pay it, the buyer's going to pay it. But in the past, the seller did pay it. And so if the seller gives that concession for the sale price of the home, clearly he built into the price of his home enough where he can afford to pay that concession in his mind. In other words, his net is okay. So my point being, you're right, it's going to be a little complicated if they work that out, but they are going to have to work that out in a way that does not suddenly punish sellers for selling a home for enough money that they can afford to give the concession, or punish buyers not building in that concession in the appraised price. Okay, the seller paid your buyer for you, that's good news, but the bad news is we appraised the house for 20 grand less because he did it. See, they haven't been doing that before. So if you think about it, the way it's being done has changed, but what's been done has not changed. Buyers have paid buyer's agents indirectly by offering the seller enough money so that the seller could pay the buyer's agent for the buyer. I mean, that makes sense. So I think going forward, yeah, it will get a little confusing as they work out some of the details. And I think it's premature now. I mean, the fact that there are concession fields, they've always existed, certainly in the San Diego MLS. I don't know that that's going to solve the big question. How are lenders going to treat that? And of course, the push isn't to, we got to allow for the fact that the seller paid money. We got to allow for the fact, look, the buyer is going to ask the seller to pay money in order to, get his agent covered, because the buyer doesn't have that much cash. So he wants the seller to pay it, so it's into the loan. That's going to be the, now out in the open. Let's address that, but it is a reality. All right.
Next question was already answered in the chat, but I'll just read it in case anyone had the same question or if you want to expand on it. Walt, the question was from Kim Tortolot, and she said, remind me, can we list buyer's concession in the MLS somewhere? And Jim Supples responded to say, not when the change takes effect. So Kim asked, okay, so it's all going to be done through conversations or through offers? And Jim said, yes, likely both.
All right, Jim, I don't want to, maybe I'm not understanding the question, or maybe I'm not understanding your answer, but yes, seller concessions paid to the buyer or paid on behalf of the buyer will be allowed in the MLS. In fact, the NAR settlement specifically says that. What can't be done is it can't be attached to a buyer hiring and paying an agent. So what's not going to be in the analysis, sellers willing to pay 2% seller concession for buyer to pay his agent. No, you can't have for buyer to pay his agent, but you can say seller will pay 2% seller concession. And in fact, they are going to create a field for that. That, in the offer side, concession sellers offering. It cannot be conditioned on the payment of a commission to a buyer's agent or even hiring a buyer's agent. So a buyer comes to you unrepresented. You got to, you're still going to have to offer that concession to the buyer. Now the concessions, because they're in the MLS, are not contractual, just like a refrigerator is not contractual. It has to be memorialized in an agreement. But yes, concessions not linked to commission will be allowed in the MLS. And by the way, just a little aside, the thought occurred to me. Jamie Mellon sent me an email. Excellent question. And that is how we're going to deal with unrepresented buyers. It's an excellent question. And Jamie, you've caused me to do some more research on that and to come up with some dialogue and some contractual provisions. That was sort of, I referenced that a little bit when I said, dual agency. But this is not dual agency, so you're not going to be the agent for the buyer, but you're still going to have a bit of a pain in the neck because you're working with a buyer who's not represented. So we're gonna be addressing that, help you with that going forward.
Great. Next question comes from Diane Hogenkamp. She wants to know, will you be covering the BRBC in detail?
Yes. Oh, yes. I'm trying to decide right now if that's the next class or not. I've got inside scoop on the forms committee, and of course I talk to Car Legal more than once or twice a week, and so yeah, we're going to do a very, very deep dive. Diane, you're kind of new to the company, but you're already fitting in beautifully. Most of the agents on this class know that twice a year I go through all the forms in great detail, the new and revised forms. And I've been through the BRBC more than a couple of times and the associated forms. I'm going to do that again with the focus with practicing real estate post NAR settlement.
Great. Next question comes from Jose Fonseca, and he wants to know, what changes do you anticipate on the listing agreement?
The biggest change is going to be all references to co-op compensation in the MLS. That's going to come out. Even the wording of down below, authorizing 6% commission, putting 3% in the MLS. That's going to go away. But there is going to be language developed where the seller could pre-approve offering compensation or concessions in a listing agreement, so that listing and listing agents being authorized to promote that. And again, just because it's in a listing agreement doesn't mean the buyer gets it. The buyer has to include it in the offer. Just like, as I said before, just because the MLS said refrigerator conveys doesn't mean the buyer gets it. It's got to be in the offer. And some of you have learned that the hard way. Some of you have been on the beneficial side of that, So, but yeah, the listing contract will change relative to those 3 points: the MLS, buyer agent commission, and buyer agent compensation.
Up next, we have a comment from our new agent, Robert Luciano. He said, I am looking forward to this change.
I love that. Robert, you're dead on right. You're preaching to the choir here. It's I think in the end, it's going to improve the professionalism of our industry. I think it's going to make it more difficult for people who pop off one deal a year to continue to be your number one competitor. Do you know, I think the number's 48%. 48% of realtors do one transaction or less per year. And those are the people that are messing up our deals. So, anybody in our company that's doing only one transaction, well, that's only because you're new or you had a tough year and you're in a bit of a slump. But we do not recruit, nor do we recommend people who only plan on doing one deal a year to be a RE/MAX Connections agent. Unfortunately, that business model is not adopted by some of our professional, our competitors. They're what some of you know, Robert, body shops. You sign up as many. I used to work for a broker for a short time, by the way, but his attitude was everybody's got 3 deals in them, and that's it. And I want those 3 deals: theirs, their mothers, and their neighbors. We don't want that. We don't want that. I'm getting licensed because I want to do 3 deals in my lifetime. Mine, my mother's, and my neighbors. No. So yeah, Robert, I agree with you. I think in the end, we're going to be better for it.
All right. Next question is from Brenda Dotz. She asked, getting commission numbers from listing agents will need to be in writing via text or email. Otherwise, it means nothing if they tell you on the phone.
Well, but Brenda, let me expand that a little bit. Technically, it means nothing in writing because you're not getting the commission. You're not getting the concession. The buyer is. And the buyer would have to have a contract with whoever's giving them the concession. So the concession will be offered via the seller to the buyer in the RPA. So you are right. Would you like it in writing so that you're not misquoted or being, you're not misquoting them? But that's not going to obligate them to give it. You know, and in fact, CAR's already looked a little bit into that. They're not sure how to do that. How do we obligate a listing agent to pay a buyer concession because they say they're going to pay one? Well, you know what? You're one step back to where we used to be. And which was, by the way, not to get in my soapbox here, but the beauty of the MLS rules. I mean, on one hand, and we talked about it in the past, Mike made this point, and I couldn't agree with him more. You know, if the agent's an idiot, we still had to give him whatever is in the MLS because that's an irrevocable offer of compensation that cannot be modified. All right. So now I'm dealing with an idiot. But think about this. Nobody on this call, but I'm not so naive to believe it doesn't happen. Somebody with the wrong last name is writing an offer. And we don't want to deal with those kind of people. We're not going to pay you that compensation. Yeah, you can buy it for free if you want. You know, they, you know, I don't want to get, make this too political because, but that's the shame. That's the shame. If I'm mad about NAR or anything, but I think the judge didn't allow it anyway. But I don't think they made a good enough case for that irrevocable offer of compensation being one of the best things for fair housing in the real estate industry. If you want to buy a house, I can't turn your agent down because I don't like, or you down for that matter, theoretically, because you or your agent come from the wrong side of town. Yeah, so Brenda, back to your question. Even getting it in writing from the listing agent is not going to ensure that they have to do it. These offers these concession offers by sellers is an offer. You know, CAR's already made that real clear several times. They didn't need to make it clear to me, not that I'm a legal eagle, but clearly the MLS is not a contract between the buyer and the seller. It's an offer. It is a disclosure for listing agents. You got to be careful. You put something in the MLS that's inaccurate, you could be sued for that. But it's not a contract between the buyer and the seller.
Right. Brenda also said earlier, these are excellent dialogue tips, already getting a lot of questions. Thank you, Walt.
Oh, thank you.
Next
No,
question.
I just want to say,
Go ahead.
this is why I get up every morning. I love this kind of stuff. So you have problems, you have questions. I've role played with a few agents already. If you're being challenged and you want to play devil's advocate and throw at me, I'm doing it for one reason. I want you to succeed. I like doing it. Together we'll work out dialogues and I do have some background in objection handling and dialogues and the neuro linguistic power of some of the phrases that I use. So thank you for your kind comments and hopefully more to come. And if I can help you one-on-one, any one of you, please call me.
All right. Next question is a two-parter. It's from Judy Spady, who asked, will a seller who previously agreed to pay a buyer's agent commission at acceptance of an offer be able to later negotiate or reduce that in escrow, for example, during repair credits, etc.? Do you want to address that first, and then I'll read the second question?
Well, I'm not sure if I'm understanding the question because it's a pretty straightforward answer. And so I'm thinking maybe I don't understand the question. But once there's a contract between the buyer and the seller for a concession or paying an agent, right now there is a contract by virtue it's part of the MLS. That's going to go away. But once there's a contract, anybody can do anything they want. We don't have guns. Some of us do, but hopefully none of you use them. So if people want to do something they're not supposed to be doing, you can't stop them, but there are consequences. So if they've agreed to pay a concession and then during the transaction, they decide they don't want to pay the concession, well, that'll have to be modified with a modification of terms. Does that answer Judy's question? Maybe part two will help me understand the question.
Well, I don't know if I think these two questions are not really related.
Okay.
Her second question was, How will a buyer who is unwilling to be represented and pay an agent get in to view a house, get in for inspections, etc.?
Well, that's a great question. And that's, referencing what Jamie Mellon had, brought that to my attention because, we've always had that problem, once or twice a year. But what Jamie's email to me and now Judy's question to me just reinforces that this is going to be more common. We're going to have procedures and dialogues and things, contractual things. But yeah, how will if the buyer somehow gets an offer to you, you have an obligation to present it, even if it's not on a CAR form. The seller, if he accepts the offer, then the offer, if the CAR offer that he accepts, the seller accepts, well, that CAR offer has built into it access to the property, the certain number of days that the buyer has unrestricted access to the property, normal business hours. So he would still have that, how he would get in. I mean, that's going to be something listing agent is going to have to think about. And that's why I said before, we're going to have to talk about at our listing presentations, maybe a fee for unrepresented buyers, so you're not, well, you do both sides of the transaction and I'm still only going to give you the 3% or the 2.5%. Well, wait a minute. No, I don't think so. So, I think what it comes down to is they don't have a contract. They don't have a lot of rights. But if they have a contract, they have all the rights built into the contract. And if the contract is anything like the CAR RPA, the buyer has quite a few rights, access to the property. And you're not, I can't hear, you're not talking to me. I don't get it.
Sorry, some clients just walked in.
Yeah.
Up next, we had some very sweet comments from Holly Serway and Sharon Miller. Holly said, Lindsay and Emily are the bomb. And Sharon said, yay, Lindsay and Emily. So thank you, Holly and
All
Sharon.
right. Thank you.
Very
Yes, yes,
sweet.
yes. Oh, that's sweet. I'm glad to thank you for sharing that with me.
I wanted that to be part of the recording. So next, Jeannie Dominguez said, appraisers will not be able to see how much co-op was paid unless they all the old listing agents. I'm not sure what she meant to say.
Well, yeah, and again, kind of, I don't want to get in the weeds here too much time, I want to answer all the questions, but co-op commissions have always been paid. And, anybody who knows anything about economics, nobody does anything for nothing. So it's whatever the buyer, gets, whatever the seller's paying, it's built into a price, and so now it's being decoupled. So how is that going to be handled in the future? There are some interesting things. I mean, kind of not quite your question, Jeannie, but a thought that you're sort of covering, and that is, in the old days, we used to go on a listing presentation, and when the seller only wanted to pay me 2%, 4% or 5%, I would say, well, I'm going to split the commission. Let's say you're only going to pay me 5%. So then I'm going to put 2.5 in the MLS and I'm going to keep 2.5. Is that what you want? Yeah. Okay, let me show you how that could hurt you. Now, it's a little better dialogue than this, but you know where I'm going with this. I would print out 6 or 7 MLS sheets. And if I printed out 6, 5 of them would have 3% in the CBC, and 1 of them would have 2.5 in the CBC. And then I would say to the seller, pretend you're the buyer. I mean, this dialogue goes back years. I did this when I listed property. And I've been in real estate 30 years and I haven't listed property for a long time. Which one would you, if you were the buyer's agent with the focus we had in those days, which one would you show last? So we can't do that anymore because there will be no commission in the MLS of any kind. So that kind of thing. Yeah, there is some data available by virtue of the fact we are listing cooperative brokerage commissions in the MLS that is going to disappear. And that will have some impact. That's a fact.
All
Hopefully
right.
not on appraisals though.
Jeannie also said good points to Maria, and Jamie Mellum also said, thank you, Maria. That's good info. And then Jim Supples said, concessions in SDMLS do not specify seller or buyer. I've listed buyer concession of 30, rent back to seller.
Well, there isn't a unique field there's talk about creating a unique field for seller concessions to buyer as a unique field, but it could be put in the remarks section. It might have to be in confidential remarks by current rules because the remark section is supposed to be property related.
Yeah, Walt, there is a concessions when we're putting in the final sales price. So
Oh,
let's
yeah,
say
no,
final
there-
sales price.
right.
And
You
say we
list
gave the
that.
buyer, gave the buyer $5,000 for termite or whatever. So we list it as what the concession is. But like I said, the concession isn't specific for buyer or seller. So if the buyer gives a concession, you can give that, which potentially affects appraisal price as well. If the buyer's paying for it, it adds to the value.
Well, I think if I follow you right, that's an interesting tweak. They're gonna have to name who's paying the concession on the sold, but on the active, on the available, it's clearly a concession offered by the seller. Is there a concession field now in the MLS that the seller is
Yes,
offering the buyer?
yes, there is.
Okay.
Yeah, so every time you put in the sold, it'll say
No, I'm not
concessions.
talking about sold. I'm talking about you're not selling it.
I know, but I'm just saying that because in the previous discussions, it was asked, questions about, oh, we're going to have to the appraiser's going to have to contact the listing agent to find out if there were concessions given.
No,
And so that's that's the point I'm making
you're exactly right. Yeah, the
on the
concession.
sale.
The concessions have been there. Yeah, exactly. In the sold, search sold, sold printout, whatever you want to, I don't use the right terminology. I mean, PDL, nobody even knows what that means anymore. But in the comps, there's concessions already there. That's and how that's going to be handled going forward, I don't know. The question is in the entry, is that same field there? Then presumably that would be a seller paid concession because seller listing
Yeah,
it.
currently, I don't believe there is.
Yeah, that's my point. I didn't
only
think
in the
so
sale.
either. And
Yeah.
that's going to be created. You can put concessions in the remarks. I suspect they have to be in the confidential remarks, but they are going to create a field for seller offered concessions. But again, they're going to be an offer, not a contractual obligation.
All right. Up next, Sharon Miller said, compensation to all agents has been part of market value always.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's my point. And so now that's going to have to be sort of better dealt with going forward rather than just, the assumption. Well, of course, whatever the seller pays has been built into the price. The key is, can we resell this house? Because the bank will pay the same costs, so that's why, the old 10% or 20% down was necessary because the bank had costs as a seller and they wanted to get their mortgage back, out of pocket mortgage. Yeah, that'll all be worked out.
All right. Next, Vicky Varnals said, I think I mentioned previously, but my concern is that buyers are not going to recognize the difference between exclusive versus non-exclusive buyer-broker agreements when agents ask them to sign. I hope CAR will make this very clear so that consumers understand.
Yeah, no, it's a very good point, Vicky, and I share that concern with you because you're going to want to know. Now almost every buyer you meet, unless they tell you, this is the first house I've ever seen, Vicky, I'm so excited to see this house. Well, then they probably have not signed a buyer agreement. But if you say, how long you been looking? Oh, about 2 months. Have you seen any houses? Oh, yeah, half a dozen, 10. Here's what they might have signed 10 buyer broker agreements. How many of them were exclusive? It'd be very problematic. So, Vicky, your concerns, that's going to be what needs to be worked out going forward, and including dialogue when you meet for a consultation. Again, that show first, sit down second model doesn't worry about that because the first is well, it should actually, let me think that through. The first is going to be a non-exclusive, but if they've already signed an exclusive, that's probably going to have to be built into the dialogue. Have you signed anything yet? Do you know if it's an exclusive?
All right. Next, Jeannie Dominguez asked, will agents who are not realtors be subject to the new rules set by CAR and NAR as far as having a buyer-broker agreement?
That's a great question. The presumption is ultimately. Why? Because the state of California is accelerating their law that they were going to pass. CAR was helping them write it. Folks, I think I mentioned this before. On the agenda to be effective January 1, 26, 1/1/26 was a regulation that buyers, agents could not work with buyers unless they had a buyer broker agreement signed. Exactly what NAR is now doing. And there are at least, I think it's up to 17 now. Several states have jumped on the bandwagon quickly. I think, at least 13, now maybe it's 17 states that have that requirement. So sometime in the future, yes, all agents will have to have a buyer broker agreement. Right now, in July, you're right, good observation. That's only going to be for NAR members only. But it's going to be the industry standard, and probably not 2026 now, because the NAR settlement is, it could be as early as January 1st, 2025.
Jamie Mellum said that email question I previously sent to Walt was about dealing with unrepresented buyers who write offers on non-CAR forms and applying our contingency removal form to them, counter offer, etc., to sign when they are unrepresented.
Right. Yeah. And what that opened up in my mind, because you were very specific, but the beauty of your question, Jamie, was, oh my gosh, we're going to have to have a system for dealing with unrepresented buyers, period, rather than a case by case. I mean, like I said, twice a year, if it's twice, it's not more than. I get calls from an agent. I got a guy who wants to buy the house. He doesn't got an agent. What do I do? Doesn't happen that often. It's going to happen, Jamie, ahead of the curve there. Yeah, it's going to happen more often. And she had very specific questions, and that, the specific questions, I think we'll be able to handle every one of them. I think the bigger question is, what is going to be, the best advice going forward on what you do when you are confronted with a non-represented buyer being on the other side of a transaction, and being the buyer who's submitting the offer even.
And the importance of our counter offer.
Yes,
Our
exactly.
form use.
Just to not to get in the weeds here, maybe I'll throw it up and people can comment or send me an email. But one of the things that you can do, and I've actually thought about this, and I've actually suggested this to some of you who might still be on the call. When you get a non-CAR form offer, you can talk to the seller. It's always the seller's choice. It's not yours. But again, capital S selling, they make decisions they might not make without you, but because of you, they're glad they made the decision later on. So you counsel the seller to the benefits of using a CAR contract. So then the counter is resubmit your offer on the CAR contract. See, it could be as simple as that as far as receiving who knows what from unrepresented buyers, because the law does say you receive an offer, a sheet of notebook paper. I'd like to buy the house. I'll pay $1 million and we'll close in 2 weeks. Signed. That's an offer. You got to present it to the seller, because both of you and the seller will laugh and throw it away, but you got to present it. So we get these unrepresented buyers with who knows what kinds of forms, and what kind of provisions do we want to hold them to? We want to see a CAR form. So yeah, right, Jamie. Handling it with a counter offer will be the way to do it.
But if we require a CAR form, then we're requiring them to have representation?
Not necessarily, because on CAR form we use RPAs all the time, so that you're involved, so clearly the seller's represented. And for the buyer representation, none.
Yeah, but it's the buyer's offer that we're gonna need to counter. So if we're gonna give them our car form, doesn't that give us liability?
Oh,
And-
no, that's a great question. You would give them, there's a lot of detail, and I'll share this with you, all of you in the future anyway, but I'll tell you now. There are two forms that you would provide. One is a buyer non-agency agreement, and the other is a Remax connections form that is a little bit more in plain English. You know, if I give you a form, I'm doing it because my client benefits from the form, and it works both ways. Sometimes you represent the buyer and the seller's a FSBO, and we need a TDS. So if I give the seller a TDS to fill out, does that make me liable for that TDS? You know, sell to the seller? No. You do a seller non-agency agreement and my FSBO letter, which is in the agent hub. Look, we're going to give you forms from time to time, but that doesn't imply that we represent you. And I've had multiple attorneys bless that we exempt. Your question's founded on a premise that's absolutely true, Jamie. If you act like an agent, you can be deemed an agent, regardless of whether you're paid or not. So that's why the non-agency agreements were created by CAR, both a buyer, not a BNA and an SNA, so that you clearly tell the party, I may act, you know, I may do stuff, but I'm not your agent. You should go get an agent, but I'm not. And then I've created one that's even a little bit more plain English that we also recommend. So we'll cover that.
Okay. Next question was from Sentinel Nathan. He asked, if I list a home on July 14th, can I list co-op agent commission?
Assuming that the rules have not been approved, adopted, and enacted, yes. There will be, maybe the point of your question is, what happens if you list the, but that will change on July 16th. So there will be an addendum to the listing contract that you modify in your already existing listings. So if you have a listing, you know, some people take listings for 1 year. I used to take listings for 1 year. So you took a listing in January for 1 year, it's going to be in place when these rules come to fruition, and it's got all kinds of stuff in it that no longer apply. So CAR is developing an addendum to the RLA and to all contracts that that contract that go past the change, it'll modify what's in the contract post NAR settlement.
All
Great.
right. The next question is from Chris Vaughn, and she asked, will the language on the closing statement reflect commissions to each side?
Whoever pays the commission, it will reflect that. Is that
All
Barb
right.
answering your question?
All right. Next was a comment from Tracy Denby, and she said, hopefully we all stand together and educate our sellers on the benefits of offering buyer's commission fee up front. Or the sellers might be paying more buyer's commission fee as the sharp buyer's agents will negotiate.
Right. And like one of my dialogues sort of took into fact, you're going to be asked to pay that fee anyway. You're going to be asked to pay that fee anyway. So if you don't offer it up front, you're still going to get offers where they ask it. So you get one offer where they ask it, but you're not offering it. You might only get one offer, or you get two offers. But if you offer it up front, you might have 6 or 7 offers. So, you know, kind of go back to the dialogue from today. Would you rather negotiate 1 offer or 6 offers?
All right. The next question, I think this was already answered because she said thanks, but Jeannie asked, so the California DRE will be able to enforce buyer broker? I think that got addressed.
Well, they don't enforce anything. Your local association enforces code of ethics, not CAR, not NAR. The code of ethics are enforced at the local level. They're going to create contracts. Then if the contracts are violated, the party who's been offended by the violation is going to have to seek restitution possibly through negotiating. That's half of my job is that, to avoid the second alternative, going to small claims court. Even that's a pain in the neck. I'd rather avoid that if I could. Or the third alternative, they hire an attorney and sue, which is absolutely. So CAR's not going to enforce anything. CAR is going to create documents that, if properly filled out, will equip the offended party when something goes wrong to having a legal case. Or, like I said, before it gets legal, equipping me and people like me to say, but wait a minute, on this addendum, you agreed, or wait a minute, right here in the RPA, it says, somebody, not to get in the weeds here, but it's an interesting question. It comes up from time to time. The RPA says the refrigerator included. Escrow closes, the refrigerator's not there. Seller's response, oh, I didn't own that refrigerator. Well, guess what? The RPA covers that. Now, does the RPA and CAR enforce that refrigerator be returned? No. My job is to convince the other side to return it. And if I fail, send our client to small claims court to get that refrigerator. So the enforcing, I just want to make this clear, none of these agencies enforce anything. Courts enforce. The agency, the CARs, the forms simply give you documentation that you've been harmed.
All right. And Jeannie also asked, can we do ministerial acts in California for unrepresented buyers and say we do not represent them, like all we are doing is filling in blanks on a contract versus acting as their buyer's agent?
Well, I don't want to, the short answer is you're not going to fill in the blanks either. That is kind of, but your point is well taken, and that's kind of what I said before. You're going to provide documents because your client needs them. If you are dealing with an unrepresented seller, we still need a TDS. If you're representing an unrepresented buyer, we still need them to remove contingencies. So forms that would normally come from the respective agent will come from you, depending on which situation you're in. I would argue that you don't fill them out. They fill them out and send them back to you, because the act of filling them out, it becomes sort of, and here's what I want you to keep in mind. I've been to court a few times. I read a lot of lawsuits. I kind of know what can go wrong. I can tell you right now what goes wrong when you fill out blanks. You are the one responsible for what's in the blank. That's why, as a rule, you never fill out a TDS on behalf of your seller. Why? Because you will be put in the legal position that you made that disclosure, and so now you're responsible. See, no, sellers fill out TDSs. Now, don't want to get in the weeds. We've from time to time had sellers that are so handicapped one way or another they can't even pick up a pen and do it. So we're gonna accommodate that, but that's not the rule. The BMI is a perfect example. What concerns do you have? You create a text field. They type in none or chain smoking next door. You don't fill it in, because I've actually been to court more than once where we filled out the form. We were responsible what was put in the blank, even though we took dictation. So yeah, we're going to provide the forms. We're not going to fill them out.
Okay. Jeannie said sort of implied agency. We don't want to do that.
No. It's
Okay.
called assumed agency, by the way.
Assumed agency. Okay. Brenda Dotz asked, if buyer doesn't have representation and they refuse to do an AVID or can't without access to it or inspections, etc., will we require them to waive these? And what if they refuse to waive?
If I understand the question right, let me answer it. There's no law that says a buyer does an AVI. So if the law says a buyer's agent and a seller's agent. By the way, the seller doesn't do an AVI either. The seller doesn't walk through their house and list all the things that are wrong with their house. They just tell you what they know. As an agent, you are required by law to go through the house and make visual observations of accessible spaces and record your findings with an emphasis on defects. A buyer doesn't have to do that. So an unrepresented buyer, there won't be an AVI or an AVID.
So I guess, well, my concern was basically with our files, because we'll just not have a buyer AVID required in our
Yes.
file then at that point.
You know, Lindsay's picking her child up at school. She's not here, but I'll say this. She knows this. She's pretty smart. So she's going to see, okay, the buyer's unrepresented. An AVID comes from a buyer's agent. There is no buyer's agent. I suspect, you know, if she ever asks me, it'll be once, but I don't even think she'll ask me. She'll just say, well, you know, AVID is an agent generated form, not a client generated form. Great question though, Brendan.
All right, I think the last question was just whether the Q&A section was going to be recorded, and it is. So if you want to watch all of this back, or for people who had to leave, it is going to be in the recording. And I guess one more thing from Vahid Baha. He asked, is that for lease/rentals? He said the commission, if someone wants to rent the potential tenant, does the potential tenant have to pay the commission to the agent, or does the landlord pay?
Well, that's a great question, believe it or not, because that's not 100% clear. And that has been discussed by Car Legal. I've been involved in a couple of conversations. Their belief is it's going to include lease rental commissions as well. And they're going to adopt these rules that affect how commissions are handled for all residential 1 to 4. By the way, commercial, half of these rules already exist in commercial. I hear that all the time, and it's true. But 1 to 4 residential, that's where these rules are being tweaked, and it will probably apply to rentals as well.
You know, well, in Massachusetts, when my son was looking for rentals there, the renter pays the agent a full month's rent as their commission.
Wow. That's pretty
That,
good.
it's like national. I mean, that's like the whole state, or at least the city of Boston and any surrounding area. The agent gets a full month's rent as their commission.
Yeah. The standard here is a percentage of the value of the lease. And so typically leases are 1 year long, and let's say it's 6%. So the value of the lease, 12 times the monthly rent, and then take 6% of that. We had an agent one time that did pretty well because her client decided to sign a 2-year lease on a high-end property. So the rent was pretty high, and it wasn't 12 times, it was 24 times 6% of the monthly times 24, which is pretty nice.
All right, unless anyone has any additional questions or comments, that was everything in the chat.
Well, Emily, thank you so much. I couldn't do this without you.
My
Lindsay,
pleasure.
started, you wrapped it up. I thank you. I thank all of you. I couldn't help but notice that most of you stayed on for all the questions. So hopefully there was good information. Hopefully you got good answers. A couple of things we didn't know for sure, and answers later. So pay attention to coming announcements, because these classes are going to come up a little more frequently. Mute.
I want to echo really fast. Thank you so much, Walt, Emily, and Lindsay.
Well, you're welcome. All right, folks, that's it. I'm going to sign off. Call if you need anything. The recording gets up and loaded pretty quickly, if not by the end of the day, certainly by tomorrow. It'll probably be tomorrow before I tweak the notes enough to make them so they're publishable. So that might be the next day, certainly, not later than Monday of this next week. If I have to do it in the weekend. Thanks all of you for joining. I appreciate so much your attention and your dedication to your career, wanting to get ahead of this. Every one of you are to be commended. You're not You're not letting your amygdala take over, you're letting your neurocortex direct your actions, and I respect that highly. Y'all take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Walt. Bye, everyone.